Good afternoon everyone, we are the Group 4 and our topic is about 1950s International Style. But before we proceed to the introduction, let's have a quick preview about what are we going to discuss later on. So first is describe and define the style. Second is the key design elements and construction methodologies. And lastly, list of name of notable projects and architects on that period. So let's get started. Introduction. International style is a term often used to describe Bauhaus-like architecture in the United States. It is an architectural style that developed in Europe and United States in the 1920s and 30s, and became the dominant tendency in Western architecture during the middle decades of the 20th century. It was closely related to modernism and modern architecture. It was first defined by Museum of Modern Art curators Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson in 1932 based on works of architecture from the 1920s. The terms rationalist architecture and modern movement are often used interchangeably with international style, although the former is mostly used in the English-speaking world to specifically refer to the Italian rationalism of architects such as Giuseppe Terragni and Gino Pollini, or even the international style that developed in Europe as a whole. It is defined by the Getty Research Institute as the style of architecture that emerged in Holland, France, and Germany after World War I and spread throughout the world, becoming the dominant architectural style until the 1970s. The style is characterized by an emphasis on volume over mass, the use of lightweight, mass-produced, industrial materials, rejection of all ornament and color, repetitive, modular forms, and the use of flat surfaces, typically alternating with areas of glass.
Key design elements. The most common characteristic of international style architecture are the rectilinear shapes, light, taut, planar surfaces that have been completely stripped of applied ornamentation, decoration, open interior spaces, and a seemingly weightless aspect created by the use of cantilever construction. The construction materials of glass and steel, in combination with the usually less visible reinforced concrete, are the most common. The international style architecture came because of three reasons. Number one, the architects grew tired of the eclectic designs of buildings, the mix of different architectural periods and styles that bore no relation to the building's function. Number two, the economical creation of large numbers of office buildings and other commercial, residential, and civic structures that served a rapidly industrializing society. And last but not least, number three, the development of new building technologies, the use of iron, steel, reinforced concrete, and glass.
These three phenomena dictated the search for an honest, economical, and utilitarian architecture that would both use the new materials and satisfy society's new building needs while appealing to aesthetic taste. Technology was a crucial factor. The new availability of cheap, mass-produced iron and steel, and the discovery in the 1890s of those materials' effectiveness as primary structural members effectively rendered the old traditions of masonry construction obsolete, which is the brick and stone. The new use of steel-reinforced concrete as secondary support elements and of glass as sheathing for the exteriors of buildings completed the technology needed for modern building, and architects set about incorporating that technology into an architecture that openly recognized its new technical foundation.
Walter Adolf George Gropius was born on May 18, 1883 and died on July 5, 1969. He was a German architect and founder of the Bauhaus School, who along with Alvar Aalto, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, and Frank Lloyd Wright, and is widely regarded as one of the pioneering masters of modernist architecture. He was also a leading architect of the International style. The Bauhaus was founded in 1919 in the city of Weimar. Its core objective was a radical concept to reimagine the material world to reflect the unity of all the arts. Gropius explained this vision for a union of art and design in the proclamation of the Bauhaus, which described a utopian craft guild combining architecture, sculpture, and painting into a single creative expression. He also developed a craft-based curriculum that would turn out artisans and designers capable of creating useful and beautiful objects appropriate to this new system of living. The Bauhaus combined elements of both fine arts and design education. The curriculum commenced with a preliminary course that immersed the students, who came from a diverse range of social and educational backgrounds, in the study of materials, color theory, and formal relationship in the preparation for more specialized studies. Gropius believed that all design should be approached through a study of the problems that needed to be addressed, and he consequently followed the modernist principle that functionality should dictate form. He applied these beliefs to wider social issues, designing affordable housing in the interwar period and seeking to improve physical conditions for factory workers through his architecture. As well as pushing boundaries in architectural design, he also experimented with innovative building and assembly techniques using prefabricated units and new materials such as reinforced concrete. Similar ideas were later utilized to create cheap, mass-produced housing in 1940s, also known as prefabs. Walter Gropius is also known the architect of the Fagus factory. Jacobus Johannes Peter Odd was born on February 9, 1890 at Purmerend near Amsterdam and died on April 5, 1963 at Wassenaar near The Hague. He is Dutch architect notable for his pioneering role in the development of modern architecture. Odd was educated in Amsterdam and at the Delft Technical University, after which he worked with a number of architects in Leiden and Munich. In 1916, he met Theo van Wasberg, and together the two men founded in 1917 the influential review De Stilge, which set forth the theories of the De Stilge group of avant-garde artists. Odd soon became the chief proponent of the De Stilge idiom in modern architecture. In 1918, Odd was appointed housing architect to the city of Rotterdam, in which post he was required to supply sorely needed mass housing for workers. The housing blocks he subsequently designed and built at Spangen on 1918, Tadschendischen on 1920, and Hoek van Holland on 1924 to 1927 had a sober and functional austerity that contrasted strongly with the picturesque elaboration of detail typical of the School of Amsterdam led by Michel de Klerk. Among his late works are the monumental and somewhat ornate Shell building on 1938 in The Hague, which disappointed some because of Odd's evident abandonment in it of the Stilge principles. The Bay Children's Convalescent Home on 1952 to 1960 near Arnhem, however, convincingly demonstrated Odd's continuing mastery of the elegant geometrical compositions typical of what had become known as the International style. From his position during 1918 to 1933 as city architect for Rotterdam, where his chief concern was mass housing, Oud became a leader in the European architecture of the International style, the Dutch counterpart of Walter Gropius in Germany and Le Corbusier in France. For the series of books issued by the Bauhaus Gropius School of Architecture, Oud produced Hollandish Architecture on 1926. Which contains, among other things, an essay on the development of Dutch architecture from PGH Cuypers through Berlage to Oud himself. Le Corbusier was an influential architect and city planner whose designs combined functionalism with bold sculptural expressionism. He belonged to the first generation of the so-called International School of Architecture, which promoted such characteristics as clean geometric forms and open, efficient spaces. Le Corbusier's architectural style can be summed up quite nicely in his very own 5 points of a new architecture. First was the use of polity, which was a thin stanchion often made of steel or concrete. used as structural support for the building. These polities not only lifted the structure off the floor to allow a more open ground level, but also supported so much of the building that the entire floor plan and facade could be more free-flowing and open, which are the second and third points. The open floor plan allowed the building to be molded into any desired form because the walls were no longer as important in regard to load-bearing functionality. The open facade was similar in nature, except that the exterior walls could now be opened up to allow for more natural lights and aesthetic interests. One particular interest of Le Corbusier was the strip windows, which was his fourth point. Le Corbusier would employ strip windows in many of his designs, as they not only allowed for natural light but also gave the illusion of a floating structure, much like his use of polities to regain the plot of nature lost by constructing the building. Le Corbusier's fifth point was the rooftop garden, which instilled some sense of naturality in the building. Richard Neutra was born in Vienna in 1892 and attended the Technische Hochschule in Vienna University of Technology from 1911 to 1917. His career crossed 5 decades, and he can certainly be defined as one of the most important architects of the mid-century as of the whole 20th century. He became famous for the simple geometries of his designs, often made of steel and glass, and the prefabricated elements that made them extremely easy to build with a modernist look. The Lovell House, as an example, could be erected in less than 2 days, thanks to its light steel skeleton. The use of prefabricated modules was also the basis of the project for a future city called Rush City Reform that Nelson designed in 1927. Amid the 30s, Nelson, as many other designers and architects of that time, experimented with the new materials and construction methods that the war industry had developed. During the World War II, when the most modern materials were unavailable, he had to abandon his experiments designing the Nesbitt House in Los Angeles and the Channel Heights Estate in San Pedro in 1942, using redwood, brick, and glass only. Probably the most important Neutra's work after the World War II are the Kaufman House, the Desert House in Palm Springs during 1946 to 1947, the Tremaine House in Santa Barbara during 1947 to 1948, and the Case Study House No. 20, the Bailey House in 1948. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, also known as Maria Ludwig Michael Mies. He is a German-born American architect whose rectilinear forms, crafted in elegant simplicity, epitomize the international style of architecture. Ludwig Mies was the son of the master mason who owned a small stone-cutter shop. Mies helped his father on various construction sites but never received any formal architectural training. At the age of 15, he was apprenticed to several Asian architects for whom he sketched outlines for architectural ornaments, which the plasters would then form into stucco buildings decorations. This task developed his skill for linear drawings, which he would use to produce some of the finest architectural renderings of his time. Mies had such an impact on modern design, art, and thought that his approach, summarized by his legendary motto, "Less is more," has become the very DNA of modernism. His lifelong quest of finding beauty, elegance, and movement with functional materials echoes our own mission at System of Motion. Less is more represents the ideal of creating something so beautiful it can be further reduced. Some facts about the name Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Mies, as he's often called, is one of our design heroes and the inspiration behind our tailored shirt style, Ludwig.
The Fagus Factory. Architect Walter Gropius. The Fagus Factory, built in 1911 to 1925 in Alfred on the Linn, a landmark in the development of modern architecture and industrial design. With its groundbreaking vast expanses of glass panels and functionalist aesthetic, The complex foreshadowed the work of the Bauhaus School and is a landmark in the development of architecture in Europe and North America. It is an example of early modern architecture, commissioned by owner Carl Benschid, who wanted a radical structure to express the company's break from the past. As I mentioned earlier, Gropius used materials typical of New England buildings, such as wood brick, and combined them with industrial materials including glass and steel. Bio Children Convalescent Home, built in 1952 to 1960. Near Arnhem, the Bio Children Convalescent Home convincingly demonstrated odds, continuing mastery of the elegant geometrical composition, typical of what had become known as the International style. Architect J.G.P. Odd, also known as Jacobius Johannes Peter Odd. He was born 1890, died in 1963, at the age of 73 years old. He was a Dutch architect. His fame began as a follower of the Steel movement.
Savoie, built in 1929 to 1930, Poissy-sur-Seine, France, by architect Charles Edward Jenrette, or also known as Le Corbusier. Villa Savoie, made of reinforced concrete. The ground floor walls are recessed and painted green so that the house looks like a box floating on delicate pilotis. Le Corbusier established the 5 points of architecture: pilotis, flat roof terrace, open plan, ribbon windows, and tree facade. Its essential geometric volumes embodies concept of the type form, and its careful consideration of precision and proportion connect the building to classical ideals. At the same time, its clean simplicity and its use of concrete evoke the precisely calibrated works of engineering so admired by the architect. The Villa Savoie represent Le Corbusier's reconception of the very nature of architecture, his attempt to express a timeless classicism through the language of architectural modernism. Marble House, built in 1929 at Los Angeles, California, by architect Richard Mutra, one of the earliest and most important examples of the international style of architecture, the rigorously geometric hillside home. The house was designed and built with its bohemian health and fitness guru occupant in mind. The house includes outdoor sleeping areas, a kitchen specifically designed for a vegetarian diet, an outdoor gym, and secluded nooks for nude sunbathing. There are built-in sofas and shelving throughout the house, along with a couple flagstone fireplaces and ribbon of windows that provide sweeping city and mountain views.
Another example would be the Lake Shore Drive Apartments, built by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and built in 1948 to 1951 in Chicago, Illinois. Built between 1949 and 1951, the 860 to 880 Lake Shore Drive Towers by Mies van der Rohe are two iconic skyscrapers on the Chicago skyline that redefined high-rise living for the post-war generation. The 26-story towers border Lake Michigan, giving residents a beautiful waterfront view. Mia's reason for the scheme involved his concept that architecture should be independent of the site, and the towers did indeed follow their own rules by being the first step towards the industrialization of architecture. Mies approached the triangular site by arranging the two apartment buildings at cross-axis towards one another, delivering views of the lake, Lakeshore Drive, and the busy inner-city Chicago Loop, which is the southwest of the towers. The 90-degree angle that the buildings are situated in also enclose a plaza at ground level. The next example is the Seagram building, built by architects Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson, which was built in 1954 to 1958, Midtown Manhattan of New York. Mies' solution set the standard for the modern skyscraper. The building became a monumental continuity of bronze and dark glass, climbing up to 515 feet to the top of the tower, juxtaposing the large granite surface of the plaza below.
The international style was thus formed under the dictates that modern buildings' form and appearance should naturally grow out of and express the potentialities of their materials and structural engineering. A harmony between artistic expression, function, and technology would thus be established in an austere and disciplined new architecture. So that's all for our topic. We hope that you have learned a lot from us. Thank you everyone and have a good day.